One of the first things I saw about Assassin's Creed Mirage was its official gameplay walkthrough video. I was thrilled to be back to running across rooftops, but what caught my attention was the first word spoken. Alhamdulillah. All praise and gratitude be to God. 17 years ago, all we got instead was safety and peace, Altair. Prior to sitting down with Mirage, one question that has been on my mind is, does there need to be a remake or remaster of the original Assassin's Creed released in 2007? Almost every other older game in the franchise has received some kind of facelift, with the rumored Edward Kenway remaster coming soon. So part of what drove my excitement for the game of Basim was the chatter of return to form, that Mirage was taking me back to the late 2000s and it wasn't a continuation of Atlantis and Valhalla. After the first 5 hours of Mirage, I was certain I had the answer. I knew for sure we didn't have to go back to Altair and Damascus. Mirage was like a remake and a reboot. But after the credits rolled, I had changed my answer to the complete opposite, a total 180. Does there need to be a remake of AC1? Yes, absolutely. This video is to try to explain what happened in the Odyssey from my early hours with Mirage to now, today, and why my answer changed. It's about how it's still a marvel Assassin's Creed came out in 2007 during the Iraq War, how language, representation, and culture has evolved from Altair into Basim, and how it's unequivocally a good thing. And how, even though the franchise just can't seem to get some things right when it comes to history and theme, Ubisoft is pretty much doing something without competition in the world of video games, letting us run through the streets of history. A few quick disclaimers. I'm neither Muslim or fluent in Arabic, so any errors in culture or religious interpretation or pronunciation are totally up to me being an idiot. We're also going to be spoiling Assassin's Creed Mirage's ending and probably the endings of some other games, but Mirage's ending spoilers are kind of going to be in the back half of this video. I'll give you a warning when they're about to arrive if you want to click around them. Thirdly, I'm talking in broad strokes about the Middle East, but it's important to understand that Baghdad isn't Damascus. These are all unique histories, peoples, and cultures. And lastly, we're talking about politics in video games, and we're talking about politics in video games. Can't say I never warned you. Mirage is set in 9th century Baghdad, during the golden age of Islam, during the formidable years of the Abbasid Caliphate, when the Middle East was one of the most vibrant, learned places in the world. It makes sense for them to all say, Alhamdulillah, this is the epicenter of Arab culture, these are all Muslims. But Assassin's Creed is set during the Third Crusade, over 3 centuries later, during the height of the Ayyubid Sultanate, during the legendary leadership of Salah ad-Din. So you'd think the Assassins, based off of mystical sect of Shiite Islam, with its characters named Altair, Malik, and Al-Mu'alim, you'd think one of them would say a religious phrase, like Alhamdulillah or Inshallah or Salam or anything. But we get no acknowledgement. All we get instead,
safety and peace, Altair.
We have 2 games, both set in the historical Middle East, both during different peaks of Islamic dominance, both with Arab protagonists, but only one really uses Arabic. You might think Mirage now overshadows the original Assassin's Creed, that we no longer have the need for an AC1 remake, but going from crusades to caliphates, we're shown a fractured mythology and a strained relationship with history, representation, and theme. And our starting point is this line from the IGN review from November 13th, 2007. It doesn't help that the voice acting for Altair is abysmal. The 12th century assassin speaks with an American accent and sounds as if he is auditioning for community theater. The Americanness of Altair's voice is our first rub in the story of Assassin's Creed and its relation with the Middle East. It was likely not known to the reviewer at the time, but Altair's voice actor, Philip Shabazz, who is of Assyrian and Lebanese descent, first performed Altair with a Middle Eastern accent. the developers kept asking him to dial it back. Take a listen to what he says in an interview podcast.
It was a series of 4 auditions, and in the first audition, they were like, hey, we want a good, strong Middle Eastern accent. So I give him a good, strong Middle Eastern accent. Call back. Hey, great Middle Eastern accent. We want you to just dial it back just a little bit. Third audition. Again, great Middle Eastern accent, but we want you to dial it back just a little bit more. Fourth audition, again, you did a great job with that accent, but we want you to dial it back even just a little bit more, until finally I got the job and was cast as.
Altair's voice is filled with further intrigue. Game critic and academic Connie Vuhen, please forgive my Dutch pronunciation, discusses in her article, Altair ibn Lahad, Assassin or All-American Hero, the saga of the accent. Originally, there was going to be an Arabic accent. Then it was scaled back more and more, as we heard in that clip. There's some suggestion that it was because the developers loved Shabaz's unaccented voice. There's another suggestion that no accent would allow the players to relate more, a Western audience to a non-Western character. What we end up with is a voice that sounds distinctly American and distinctly not Arabic.
The merchant king of Damas murdered the nobles who ruled his city. Majd ad-Din in Jerusalem used fear to force his people into submission. I suspect William...
And also then a further explanation for why this is, by the game's producer Jade Raymond. Remember her? Geez, time flies. Altair's accent was American because when you and I play Assassin's Creed, we're not actually playing as Altair. We're playing as Desmond in the Animus, who's reenacting Altair, and Desmond is American. Which means we have to talk about the Animus. The creative director of AC1 and AC2, Patrice Désilets, notes that Assassin's Creed is not meant to be a historical game, but a sci-fi game in a historical setting. This is why the Animus exists, and it's where we start to get entangled in the mythology of these dozen-plus games. The Animus is a technology that lets you explore the memories of your ancestors. Desmond Miles is the real main character, and Altair and the Levant is a historical reconstruction we're playing through via the Animus. We're not actually in Damascus when we play there, we're in an Abstergo lab shackled to a machine that is creating a Damascus for us. If that isn't some Tropic Thunder level dude playing a dude playing a dude, I don't know what is. We'll come back later to the Animus and the evolving mythology of the franchise, but for now, I have trouble believing solely in Jade Raymond's Animus sci-fi explanation for Altair's representation because of this guy.
And this is a new kind of evil, and we understand. And the American people are beginning to understand. Now, this crusade, this war on terrorism.
It was a little over 6 years since 9/11 when Assassin's Creed was released. The Iraq War, although not nearly as popular as it was in 2003 and 2004, is still ongoing. And here we are playing as Altair, assassinating targets on both the Christian and Muslim sides of the Crusades. Former President Bush used the word Crusades, and it's deeply problematic. If that isn't a tie back to history, I don't know what is. But it immediately diminishes a complex conflict into the binary of West and East, and arguably of Christian and Muslim, of the Western and the Orient. But the Crusades, to anyone who studied them, cannot be reduced to something so simple, and it wasn't something so simple. The use of crusade just became one other ingredient at that time in the boiling pot of discrimination, hatred, and Islamophobia. There was a syndicate of anti-Islamic rhetoric that spread throughout the United States, Western Europe, and discrimination against many Muslim, Arab, and Asian communities increased across the globe. And so here comes along Ubisoft Montreal, led by Patrice Désilets and Jade Raymond, saying you're going to be in the thick of one of the most politically and religiously charged periods of history. What continues to astound me to this day is that I don't think Assassin's Creed has been so bold in their setting since the original game. Very, 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 very little of any kind of media gets set during the Crusades, I cannot help but theorize that the American-sounding Altair was a cushion in navigating the marketing of this game. While there was backlash to the lack of Arabic, I also just genuinely can't imagine Altair sounding like Basim in that time period. Because there was another game released in 2007 that changed the landscape of gaming forever. Its trailer came out in the summer before Assassin's Creed release, and it painted an all too familiar picture of the dusty, half-built, sepia-colored Orientalist fantasy of this region and its people. Perhaps it's too cynical of me to think that they dialed back on the Middle Eastern accent because we were still living in a time where the idea of playing as an Arab based off an Islamic group during a period of a heightened religious conflict might be risky enough. But perhaps, though, it's also because even though Assassin's Creed 1 is set during the Crusades, it's not actually about Muslims, Christians, Arabs, and Normans at all. And how surprisingly, this continues into Mirage. Here now we have to talk about Basim and Altair in parallel. Going into Mirage, I had some expectation that, because of that gameplay walkthrough video, the game might deal with faith and morality as a theme. Because while seemingly no one in Assassin's Creed is religious, philosophy and belief are present with the death of almost every Templar target. The slaver thinks God has left the world, the noble cannot support believers who think his sexuality is an abomination, the Norman who dislikes Richard the Lionheart's blinding Christian faith. But the actual religious political conflict of the Crusades isn't engaged by Altair, which doesn't feel dissonant because he doesn't feel particularly Islamic, but neither does it always feel the best. The Masayaf order is based off of the Nizari Shiites who targeted the Christian Crusaders and Sunni Ayyubids. But here, the religious underpinning of the real world is replaced by the fiction of Assassin's Creed. So as the franchise has attempted to become more than its origin story, I was hopeful for Basim. He invokes God's name throughout, but he doesn't have any sort of dialogue around faith in its historical or political context. Whereas the death scenes in AC1 at least create space for questions on philosophy, Mirage's conversations are stilted, short. Maybe it's because the Templar Hidden Ones don't have any clear motivation? I like to think I pay attention when playing video games, but I must have been out to lunch on something. The most interesting historical tidbits we get throughout the story is the evolving political relationship between Arab and Persian regions of the Caliphate as it comes to a matter of succession. Even the anarchy of Samarra and the Zanji rebellion are treated strangely. This is one of the most brutal, most bloody periods of the Abbasid history. Yet all we get is a musing or two on the ends justify the means, which is such an overused trope at this point. The Zanji rebellion was largely driven by slaves. The anarchy of Samarra is about the matters of empire. What could be a whole dialogue on all of this violence and freedom, empire and order, we get none of that. Basim just trudges through it all without much question. Basim does have a charm to him, but I was surprised to see his inquisitiveness begin and end with his Jinni nightmares and Roshan's secrecy. Some of the most interesting conversations and interactions in the entire game are with Kabiha, the concubine of the late Caliph and mother to a potential successor, but even they can't break free of the issue to say anything about the historical context that surrounds these characters. Mirage is a great example of this franchise becoming so wrapped up in its own mythology that it can't even ponder questions of history anymore, or create any kind of historical drama. Altair, on the other hand, is deeply curious with the words of his targets and seemingly the world around him. This tethers his evolution to the setting of the Crusades. In a period where men seek to reshape the world through the Holy Land, Altair has questions. But Basim? His story could have been set during almost any period of the Abbasid Caliphate. Part of me now struggles with Basim's representation, his use of language, because it feels sometimes like a nicety rather than something meaningful. When playing through Mirage, I got to the same point as that official gameplay walkthrough video. They say Alhamdulillah in the context of Basim having successfully assassinated Al Ghul. But Basim and Al Ghul don't talk about morality or ethics or about anything going on around them. Al Ghul is unequivocally a bad dude. He mercilessly exploits others, and he confesses a need for social hierarchy, believing in absolute rule, yet there's just really nothing interesting about it at all. And funnily enough, that's exactly what distinguishes the story of Altair from the story of Basim. What's interesting. And this is best expressed through the characters of King Richard the Lionheart and the Abbasid Caliph al-Mutawakkil. When you meet King Richard the Lionheart at the end of Assassin's Creed, it's to find the truth of who is manipulating the Crusades for their own gain. William de Montferrat, Master Cibran, Garnier de Naplouse, Robert de Sable, all Crusaders have used horrible violence for their own means, for their own vision of the future. Yet, Richard the Lionheart isn't a Templar. He isn't even the enemy. Altair's conversation with him is one of trying to find peace between him and Salah ad-Din, about trying to end the Crusades. There's a reverence in how this historical character is treated, how he's part of the climax of the game, how he's depicted as being powerful, formidable, and magnanimous. Even though his men betrayed him to the Templars, he still has a certain strength to his presence on screen. All of this is in stark contrast to how the Caliph al-Mutawakkil is treated. He's manipulable, weak. This is now your spoiler warning for the ending of Mirage. Skip ahead to the time on screen to continue. And unlike Altair with Richard, Basim, you, the player, kills al-Mutawakkil. You kill the Caliph. This is the big twist of Mirage, that Nahal, who you thought previously was the killer, is a mirage. Some kind of figment of your imagination, some kind of manifestation of some issue, possession, magical stuff. The Caliph al-Mutawakkil is a religious and political figure. He is a descendant of the family of the Prophet. That's why in part he is Caliph. I can't articulate why it feels so jarring or uncomfortable, but it just feels weird to play an Arab Muslim assassin that kills a Caliph. What's worse is that Basim's guilt for the murder is jumbled up with the guilt for his friends who died in revenge for the Caliph's killing. I don't know how to navigate the complexities of what to think or feel here, only that it all just seems strange. And of course, throughout medieval Islamic history, there were many accounts of betrayal, civil wars, and fratricide, and worse. This isn't the first Caliph to meet a bloody end. Yet, I just wish it was treated with greater appreciation than what we got. I wish Basim said or did something interesting with all of this, but we get nothing. You might be typing up a response now that, hey, Ezio fistfights the Pope. And I think that's a little bit of the point. Ezio Auditore notably doesn't kill Rodrigo Borgia. And even then, the Spaniard is framed as fearful, formidable, powerful, a part of the big final act of the game. Al-Mutawakkil dies in a cutscene in the first hour of the game. The most powerful man in the Abbasid Caliphate, gone. Just like that. There are other oddities with Mirage and its relationship with history and religion besides the killing of the Caliph. These issues only stand out because of how well Mirage handles many other aspects of the Abbasid Caliphate. It demonstrates the richness of the Islamic Empire and all of the contributions made to the sciences, the arts, and commerce. The House of Wisdom, the Grand Bazaar, the poets in the courtyards, the bustling caravanserai, all of this was such a marvel to explore. The richness of culture expressed in the world building of Baghdad and the surrounding desert landscape is some of my favorite in all of the franchise, if not, top 10 in all of video games. But Islam was an important part of the Abbasid Caliphate, and Mirage seems to skirt around religion and religious institutions. We have the beautiful call to prayer, how far we've come from Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2007. But we never see acts of worship. Only the Zanji rebels shout about the glory of God. We have Basim killing the Caliph while also saying Alhamdulillah. I can forgive AC1 because they constructed Altair as an outsider, and we were in a different time. But it's harder to forgive Mirage knowing Basim grew up in Baghdad and now that it's 2024. While a roguish charm does occasionally appear amidst Basim's lapdog obedience to Roshan in the Creed, while he does look and sound and act like a Middle Eastern protagonist, He doesn't always seem natural in this environment like other Assassin's Creed protagonists do in their own worlds. I think a big part of this is because Ubisoft hasn't figured out how to navigate the complexities of an Islamic setting. Basim killed the Caliph. Even before the revelation of Nahal, he was complicit in the Caliph's death. I was just waiting at some point for some sort of questioning of faith, belief, religion, God, ethics, morality, anything. Please, so help me, reflect on anything. But Basim doesn't. With the ending of the story, I feel like a big part of it in the world was missing. I felt uneasy about the revelation of Nahal. Assassinating members of the Order of Ancients didn't seem to impact the outcome of the plot to remove Persian protection from Alamut, seemingly Kahiba's scheme all along. When I first thought a remake of AC1 wasn't needed, it's because Basim felt like a positive reconstruction of Altair. Their origin stories are both of arrogance, humility, death, and service to the Creed. They're both loyal to their masters, yet eventually have to confront them. I was convinced we didn't need to go back to Masyaf. When credits rolled, I put down the controller and realized we still need the story of Altair, and that it should be remade and remastered and brought to a modern audience. Where Mirage gives us an Arabic protagonist, Basim's story feels dissonant and unrealized. Where Assassin's Creed gives us meaningful dialogue on the Crusades, Altair is hampered by the societal context of the 2000s. Altair is trying to secure peace and freedom. Basim is trying to stop people from digging up an old Isu temple for reasons explained in another game. It's a shame Basim's story can't actually be about the people of Baghdad. Maybe we haven't really evolved in the sophistication of the storytelling of Assassin's Creed. Maybe it's always been a bit silly, and I keep knocking my head against the wall and should just appreciate the immaculate historical world building and leave it at that. There have been some outlying entries along the way, but we're still too busy using the franchise's mythology and science fiction that all get in the way of making a story memorable. We've killed Jade Raymond's Animus and been allowed to depict and play as a more representative Arab protagonist in a more authentic setting. But we haven't killed those who came before to give us an actual historical drama. All of this might now be pointing to the question, so what, John? Who cares? And I think my Odyssey just illustrates that Ubisoft hasn't really nailed it when it comes to creating an Assassin's Creed game set in the Middle East. Because the other final issue is that Assassin's Creed 1 does have some kind of point or message. What is Mirage actually about? Unlike the stories of Radun Hagedun in 3, or Edward Kenway in Black Flag, or the iconic Ezio Auditore trilogy, Basim's story isn't really about his culture or his community. It's not about Islamic history even, and the role of assassins in it. Perhaps that's the answer to this question of so what, of how representation doesn't give you a pass, that behind a good voice, you still need a good story. For a long time now, Assassin's Creed has tried to shift all of its focus away from the Animus and the crazy theories and honestly the science fiction of this world, to give us a mythology that is actually fundamentally about the same thing it now uses as its titular theme: Ezio's family. Assassin's Creed is about family, and Mirage tries to stumble into this, I guess, because of who Basim actually is in this whole weird reunion sequence thing with Nahal and all of the Isu familial drama and how it ties to Valhalla and all of that. I don't know, my eyes glaze over. Altair's story is fundamentally about the Crusades. Basim's story isn't fundamentally about the Abbasid Caliphate. They are both different, important iterations of the Assassin's Creed franchise and its relationship in the Middle East. My hope is that we will return a third time, and Ubisoft will finally get both right: character and story, representation and history. In 2014, I was enrolled in a history seminar at school called The Crusades and Muslims. This was a group of 20 history nerds all huddled around a big table, talking about everything from the Norman conquest, to the Fatimid bureaucracy, to King Baldwin IV, to the role of the Catholic Church. There were two pieces of media, though, that were often cited and joked about around the table: Assassin's Creed 1 and Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven. Altair and Salah ad-Din. Both Arab and non-Arab students had this common bond because of how we consumed and treasured these pieces of media. I wouldn't be surprised if some of us signed up for this class because of this game and this movie. I know I certainly did. When we talk about the power of games and the importance of Altair, I look back to this personal anecdote and how a game brought students together. That's why for all of the misgivings of both Altair and Basim, they are undoubtedly significant. The developers reconstructed an imagined version of 9th century Baghdad through working with skilled and representative historical consultants, historical societies, and museums, both in Iraq and abroad. Mirage is an archaeological marvel. No proof of the round city survives, and here I am running around as Basim, filled with joy just to be parkouring again along the canals, the observatories, the gardens of a city that no longer exists and we really have no trace of. No other franchise has this overall positive, if imperfect, relationship with the Middle East. Few other games let me run through the streets of a lost history, playing as a character from that history, with a believable world and people and culture of that time. There's no understating the great strides the stories of Altair and Basim make, even if there is still always more work to be done and better stories to be told. As a Canadian student wrote to one of the historical consultants who advised on the cultural recreation of Mirage, "It's nice to see my people and culture be a bit more than target practice for first-person shooters." I have no doubt now the next 20 nerdy students to sit around the history seminar table, ready to learn about the medieval Middle East and its scientific discoveries and poetry and art and religion, that there will now be 3 names that may have inspired them to be there. Altair ibn Lahad, Salah ad-Din, and Basim ibn Ishaq.